Hey, everybody. We're here today with Dr. Armin from Germany, who started his career by working in several hospitals and labs in Germany. He went on to do a lot of laboratory medicine before founding and featuring Armin Labs all across the world. Many of you are familiar with this lab, Armin Labs. In fact, our first Lyme patient Rich and I ever encountered got diagnosed through Dr. Armin and his labs over in Germany. He serves over 150 countries through his lab. He has over 500 tests he performs daily for the Lyme community. He's also a member of the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society, and also a member of the International Lyme and Associated Disease Education Foundation as well. So Dr. Armin helps educate other doctors and also helps put sound science-based information out there to the community. So Rich, can you give Dr. Armin a really, really warm welcome from our Tick Bootcamp community?
Yeah, so Dr. Armin Schwarzbach, we are really excited to have you, and it's been a long time coming. As the founder of the premier Lyme disease lab in the world, we've really wanted to and been very anxious to have you on the podcast, but it's taken 4 years before we could finally get together with you. And as Matt had shared with our listeners during the introduction, our very first guest actually had been diagnosed from your lab. And from that point forward, we've sort of coveted an interview with you, but we finally have gotten there. So Dr. Armin, thank you for joining us on the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Thank you, Matt, having me today here. So I'm so happy to help you for your community and give information what you want from my side.
So Dr. Armin, why don't you give us a little information about your background? Matt did give a brief introduction, but it was very, very limited, and you have a much more, I think, a very strong background. So why don't you first talk to us about where you grew up and what was driving you towards a career as a healer in the medical community?
Yeah, it's a longer story. As you know, I'm now in this field over 20 years. So I started with tick tests, 2000. I think that was not so common in the world to test the tick. For Borrelia burgdorferi, we didn't know anything about the co-infections that time. And in 2005, interestingly, I diagnosed a multiple sclerosis patient with a special test. It's named the ELISpot test, interferon gamma release assay. And the doctors, they treated this patient sitting in a wheelchair, blindness on the left eye, 40 years old, fatigued, and so sensitivity problems, nearly dying. They said it's multiple sclerosis and spinal fluid, and everything was negative that time. And the patient came into one of my presentation. I was not so experienced in that time, 2004, 2005, so 20 years ago. I learned later on from Joe Boroscano and from Horowitz a lot about this differentials, co-infection. And the patient came to me and said, "Oh, I have multiple sclerosis, but you talked about maybe I have Lyme disease, neuroborreliosis." I said, "No. Multiple sclerosis cannot be." I'm a traditional doctor, educated medical doctor from University of the 80s, and as you mentioned, internal medicine. And I said, "No, it could not be Lyme disease. Why should you have Lyme disease?" And then I did the first time this specific test, and the test was positive and the antibodies completely negative. And then I didn't treat that patient. I did services with a huge laboratory like West and LabCorp doing, and it was a different lab. I was the COO for 300 employees. I was traditional doctor at that time, and I recommended a doctor treat this patient with Rocephin, which is an antibiotic, and the patient got cured. I cured a multiple sclerosis patient in 2005. I said, "Oh, what's going on?" I said to myself, I worked in neurology, I worked in internal medicine, I'm a medical doctor. You cannot cure a multiple sclerosis patient coming out from the wheelchair, going back to work, 40 years old. For me, it was sensation. And then the newspaper came in Germany, and it was spread around Germany, that case. And then, yeah, maybe that was the start of my giving up all of my features before, all of my work before, coming into the field of Lyme disease. And now I'm absolutely convinced that not all patients with multiple sclerosis suffer from Lyme disease, but some of them. So you need to check all of these multiple sclerosis patients for Lyme disease. And the spinal fluid, maybe I mentioned that or a little, is not sufficient enough to do a spinal tap and to say, oh, I exclude Lyme disease, I exclude neuroborreliose. That's absolutely a mistake. So I said to myself, we have system failures. Stop all of your former work, high risk, do something new, go to ILADS. ILADS was a little group, 50 attendees that time. And now I'm sitting here and 20 years experience, looking back, nearly 20 years, just doing, it's a full-time job. You know, you cannot do it to say, oh, I do a little Lyme disease in my laboratory, in my clinic. It's so interesting. You can help so many patients, not just with multiple sclerosis.
That is such an exciting story and a great origin story that I think our community would really love. I mean, we have many folks who respond to our social media when we share that in many cases people are misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis when in fact they have Lyme disease, and that's the experience that changed the course of your career and caused you to become a functional medical doctor who specializes in testing and treating Lyme disease. And that is really a cool origin story. But let's walk back before that part of the origin story, because you have a very strong educational foundation for what brought you to that experience where you were treating patients in the early 2000s. First, why don't you talk to us about your early studies where you received your PhD in 1992?
Yes, I was a military soldier. I served military army professionally 2 years together with American soldiers. There was the iron borderline, you know, that time maybe in the early 80s, were a young man. And then I didn't know what to study. Then I decided for biochemistry. I studied a little pharmacy. I worked for Aventis, a huge company in science, but that was not sufficient enough. So something was missing to me. And then I decided to do medicine. And this is 6 years study minimum in Germany at a good university. But Lyme disease didn't exist that time, you know, and it was not taught. Nobody knew about Lyme disease in the 80s, you know, it was the time Willy Burgdorfer came. Yeah, and then I was always interested in laboratory tests that time because my whole life, I'm laboratory man, you know, from the beginning, early 80s, now 40 years, I'm laboratory doing clinical chemistry, biochemistry and microbiology. But I did this PhD in endocrinology. That was the first worldwide radioimmunoassay for human gastric inhibitory polypeptide, a little peptide in the gut. So I have also some experience in science, in developing test systems, but that was all not sufficient enough. And later on, I decided to go to a medical clinic, to a hospital, because I said to myself, you need to learn something about medicine. It doesn't make sense to just to work in laboratory. I'm a medical doctor. I want to see patients to learn about heart attacks, strokes, and I had really good luck that time. I work in oncology, so I did cancer treatment with chemotherapies. I did the same time nephrology. I did gastroenterology and also cardiology, and I had the best time also in infectious diseases. So I was the doctor responsible for infections. And that time, you remember back 80s, 90s, HIV infections, AIDS, that was problematic. And I think we come later to this model with the 3 I's, where I can tell you about that, how to diagnose and treat Lyme patients, give you some more treatment options, diagnostic options. So I'm coming also from treating AIDS patients. I treated them. I diagnosed malaria. I diagnosed salmonella. I diagnosed Yersinia. I diagnosed hepatitis B, C didn't exist, H. pylori. I was actively treating them with antibiotics. And interesting, in the early 90s, 1990, we had a sensation. We had this patient with this gastric cancer, the gut cancer. You remember back, we could not rescue them. We had this patient with gastritis, with bleeding. We could not rescue them. And then came the H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori. That was a bacteria, it was sensation. This bacteria, this pathogen can survive in the gut, is so acid. Yes, it can survive, and now we know it's also resistant. And that was the time I was really fascinated about infections, infectious diseases, to eradicate H. pylori, this pathogen. And then the patients all better, and said, wow, wonderful. That was a tremendous success. But again, Lyme disease didn't exist. We never checked patients for Lyme disease. Nowadays, I would say I treated also multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic fatigue. But nowadays, I would say I misdiagnosed a lot of them 30 years ago without knowing, because it was not in the mainstream medicine. It was not taught. It was a young disease. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors, they cared more about HIV infections. Freddie Mercury died, you know, all of these stories of the 80s, 90s. So Lyme never was in our brain. We were not taught that way.
Right. So let me just summarize quickly for our listeners. So you have a PhD, which is how you began your career in the medical arena. You then went on to you became a medical doctor. You got an MD, and then after you earned your PhD and your MD, you also went on and achieved an additional degree as a specialist of laboratory medicine. So you had this very diverse foundation of PhD, MD, and then of course the specialist in laboratory medicine. And while you were earning your various accreditations in the educational arena, you were also treating a number of different patients first in the arena of endocrinology, immunology, and then ultimately the laboratory sciences. So you had a very, very strong educational foundation before you found yourself treating people with Lyme disease in the early 2000s.
Exactly, that's the way in Germany. It's and a few other countries, you need to be a medical doctor to get the qualification. 5-6 years also you need in Germany to be a laboratory doctor, the second qualification. And also I'm a little qualified in internal medicine, so I could discuss with cardiologists and so gastroenterologists and so. This is not every doctor can do that in the world. Normally, laboratory leaders are biochemistry or biologists. You know, they don't know about medical. They don't see the patient. So I have both sides. And for me, it's so important to bring laboratory very close to the patients, from the differentials, from the symptoms, using laboratory tests, coming to diagnose, and then which treatment is needed for which patient, for which infections. This is the differential. It's so important to me.
Let's talk a little bit more about the organizations and the foundations that you're associated with, because Matt did share with you, because most of our listeners are from the US, but not all of our listeners. We have actually a very large following in Europe as well, that you're not only associated with ILADS, which is the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, and their educational arm, but you're also affiliated with the German Borreliosis Society and the Swiss Association for Tick-Borne Diseases, and I'm going to need your help with this, the Australasian Integrative Medicine Association, where you've also served in various organizations both in the US and in Europe. So can you talk to us a little bit about what inspired you to become active in so many both American and European medical organizations?
I like USA, I like Europe, I like you guys there, and
well, thank you.
I liked or love ILADS, so I was on board ILADS 10 years ago. Now I'm on the ILADEF. You mentioned that educational foundation. So I want to bring. I think I also I'm a little teacher. I want to bring a mission to the people. I want to bring a mission to the patients for sure, but also to therapists, to educate them, to teach them, because knowledge is so poor in the world about Lyme disease, co-infections, what is. I had the same story behind me 20 years ago. I didn't know what is co-infection, Bartonella. I never heard about that. I said, oh, it's from my uncle from the moon or somewhere. I never heard about Babesia. I said, what's Babesia? That's something for the dogs or so. That was a funny story. Yeah, my mission was also to bring that, because I like to, I was also entertainer, maybe I was a keyboarder since, also 50 years or so, it was 13 years. So I entertained people in bigger bands and playing music. So that time, Hammond organ. And so I like that. And this is also to my mission, to bring also that style, to make it not boring, to make this also alive, this topic, because it's could be boring if you go into this theoretical thing. So I want to teach, educate, and I was also a member of the I went to Oreachtas, to Parliament. I was advisor for the Australian government, Rich Horowitz together. I went to Canberra, Australia. I was in this think tank from Canada. They asked me. I went with Christian Perron to Paris also. So I did a lot of action, but I don't want to be in the foreground. I want to be in the background. I'm a networker. I want to bring people together, and I'm always happy, as you mentioned, the patient feels better. I'm happy if a doctor feels better, because patients feel better, I feel better. So this is my mission, and it's not a mission impossible.
I'd like to focus for a moment on your educational background. I mean, you are clearly a polymath. We should probably talk about the things you haven't done, because that list would be shorter than all the things you are accomplishing as an entertainer, as an educator, as a medical doctor, as an expert on so many different topics. But what is always interesting to us here at Tick Bootcamp is how mindset controls cognition, meaning your mindset will control what you have the capacity to see. And we see that in a number of different pieces. And we interviewed, for example, Dr. Tanya Dempsey recently, where she shared with us that she, although practicing in upstate New York and a brilliant doctor, she never saw a Lyme patient until she took a Horowitz course. And then once Dr. Horowitz shared with her what the elements of Lyme disease were, she just saw patient after patient after patient with Lyme disease. And it seems like you had that same experience. So despite you were seeing Lyme patients, because you didn't have the capacity to perceive that they were Lyme patients, because your educational experience and any other information that you had gathered did not allow you to see Lyme disease, because it wasn't a part of your educational experience. So talk to us about how you had an epiphany when you learned about Lyme, and how all of the patients that you're now treating with Lyme disease had been misdiagnosed, not just by you, but everyone in the medical community, because there was an adequate education on Lyme disease.
Yeah, after that episode with this multiple sclerosis patient, maybe I mentioned she's cured until nowadays. So she's completely healed from that. She was also wrongly treated with corticosteroids that time, because doctors using now immune suppression, not to boost the immune system, the absolute wrong way they are doing now in medicine, my opinion. So when I came to that field, I said to myself, I need, like Horowitz, that was similar time. I did it more in Europe. I did some road shows, you could say. I went to different countries, to Norway, to Finland, to Italy, to Spain, to France, everywhere I went. And I tried to give some webinars, not webinars that time, workshops. Webinars came later on. But I'm just a single man. I'm a single fighter. They named me the German Lyme fighter that time. Also, we had a little Lyme fighting team in the world. ILADS was really good, but it was a little group, 50 members, that's all. Then we grew up to more, and it's still this mission, and to inform the doctors, to teach them about how to diagnose, and this misdiagnosis, what I cannot tolerate. If you play a song as a musician and you play the wrong way, you say, oh, you're playing horrible. Your music style, so play different. So I think we are not educated. My generation, student from the 80s, 90s, maybe nowadays the guidelines, they are completely wrong. You know, they are just monopolistic guidelines for neurologists, for dermatologists. They hide behind the guidelines. They say it's a guideline. So, but what is guideline? Guideline is a recommendation. So it's a political thing. It's for sure. I asked also myself the question, why is it so misdiagnosed? That's an important question. Why do you not accept what the patient is telling you? The patient tells you the truth. You could say, okay, everybody's psychosomatic, send them to the hospitals there, give them antidepressive remedies, but this is not the solution, you know. And maybe you have a chance, if it's really an active infection, if it's Lyme disease, you can diagnose, you can treat. And then I came to the tests, you know, horrible tests. The ELISA, forget the ELISA, forget the immunoblots, forget the Western blots. There's a longer story about that, where I came from this T-cell test that time 18 years ago. I never were teach. I'm laboratory doctor. I never were taught about that, you know. So I was educated in the wrong way. So completely one-way street within that end. No solution. Patient taking their lives. No hope. Working disabilities. It costs a lot of money for the social systems, you know, if you cannot go to work. This is all the story behind that. But what I know nowadays, I can tell you, nearly every condition, also hair loss, for sure, the ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, if you have, as an example, autism, ADHD, if you have all neurological issues, symptoms, Parkinson's, whatever, not just the multiple sclerosis, also neuropathies, the heart, Borrelia burgdorferi can move everywhere. I didn't know that time. So I think it's easy to diagnose, easy to treat. So it doesn't exist. And that is the general mistake I did also. So you can say, Armin, you're guilty for that, but I didn't know that. But wow. If you know that, you should change your mind. And the doctors are not so open-minded. They are fixed with their guidelines, you know, in the different subspecies. So neurologists, as an example, they are fixing their guidelines. If the spinal fluid is negative, no Lyme disease. So if you can discuss that, and also be careful, Rich. Not everything is Lyme disease. Right, I can tell you. In the beginning, I thought everything is Lyme disease. So the years 2006, 2010, I thought everything is Lyme disease in the world.
Yes. So we have to strike that balance between recognizing that there is a great deal of Lyme disease, but not everyone has Lyme disease. My wife often accuses me of believing that every single person in the world has Lyme disease. And I am certainly to the point where I believe everyone in our local community where we live on Long Island, New York, certainly is harboring the Lyme bacteria. It doesn't mean that it's symptomatic. And I think most of us have a healthy enough immune system where we can manage that. But we'll get there in a second. I do want to talk a little bit more about how a man with your diverse interests and your diverse background ultimately came to funnel that diverse set of experiences and education and interest to opening a lab. How did you ultimately funnel all of those interests down to a point where you decided you were going to open a lab? And did you believe, as part two of my question, that you were going to build the premier Lyme disease lab in the world?
I was forced doing that. You know, the preconditions, it was not the money-making aspect, because it's a high risk if you switch from a good position from an established normal laboratory like Quest or LabCorp. You have good position as a laboratory doctor. You never would do for the money aspect to start a laboratory like that. It's a high risk business if you start that. Maybe we go back 2006. I started with a Lyme clinic, interestingly. I met a colleague and we said, okay, let us do together and start a Lyme clinic. Unfortunately, the Lyme clinic didn't went so pretty well after a while. And then I said, okay, I need to separate the clinic because I have a conflict of interest in that. I want to be independent from clinics, from therapists. It doesn't make sense to cooperate so closely. I said, do your own lab. So I did also some therapies in that former clinic. I treated just Lyme disease, but I didn't know about all of these other infections, viruses, parasites, yeast, mold, mycotoxins. Now, okay, I learned also a lot because it's, as you mentioned, it's not all Lyme disease. We need to talk about the complexity of this chronic multiple system illnesses the patient's suffering from. So I came from this treatment to say now, Armin, let us start a Lyme lab just for Lyme. But it was more than Lyme. It was also the co-infections. It was, after a while, it was clear it's not just in the ticks, the Borrelia burgdorferi. It's also a lot of other pathogens, chlamydia, mycoplasma we found with Eva Sharpe in some studies. So we came to the aspect also to go more into the broader infectious diseases. It's, as I mentioned, Lyme is a starter. Let me say now, the menu is coming later. It's like SARS-CoV-2, you have the virus is coming to your body, but later on you suffer from other inflammation or whatever, or coagulopathies, autoimmune disorders. So this is, but what I can tell you, and you're correct, in your area, everybody had tick bites. I had also tick bites for sure, but I don't have active Lyme disease. So I have some other issues, other pathogens in my body. Can talk later about that. It's not Borrelia burgdorferi. I had a tick bite when I was 6 years old, and my parents I'm 60 years, my parents put oil on the ticks. And, it was on my head and it was hurting. And in the 60s, nobody knew about Lyme disease. So, but I don't have Lyme disease. So I never had these symptoms, but other patients have this for sure. So Lyme is for sure, I think we should keep it in the focus, but we know now it's more than Lyme disease. You know, this is my story, and maybe you are on the way on that story. If you interview other people like Horowitz or other experts in this field, they will tell you similar stories. We work independently, you know, we meet at ILADS conferences, but we respect each other, but everybody has to do so much work. We don't know where to start and where to begin. This is so much work, so many patients, and the doctors do the mistakes. They do the mistakes outside. You cannot say you're guilty for your mistakes. They don't know better. We try to rescue. We try to educate. We try to do everything, but we are a little group. We are minority. It's David versus Goliath. You know, the system. We are not the mainstream medicine now.
So Dr. Armin, I just want to highlight the fact that we are so happy that you are part of this powerhouse team of ILADS. And you've mentioned Professor Eva Sharpe, Dr. Richard Horowitz, Dr. Joseph Virascano, all of whom we've had on this podcast that have brought similar ideas together, but not exactly what you're sharing. So each of you bring a different piece to the puzzle to the table. And it's really exciting to hear your piece of the puzzle in this experience, right? But another thing we really appreciate about you and your story so far is the fact that you said, hey, look, I got my PhD in 1992, over 30 years ago. I didn't even know what Lyme was. Then I realized Lyme was a thing. And then I thought everything was Lyme. And then I realized not everything is Lyme. And there's a lot of other things, co-infections, et cetera. It's the multitude of things, infections, bacteria, and that contributes to the overall picture of somebody's health. But I think where many of us get stuck is we don't want to say that we could be wrong. We don't want to admit that there are things we maybe don't know, and that causes us not to grow and therefore not get better in our healing journeys. One of the posts we've recently put up on our social media was about the connection between Lyme disease and Bartonella. And many people, Lyme disease, Bartonella, and autism. And the autism community got up in arms on this post saying that autism is not a symptom, it's a personality trait. It's ingrained in their personality. And no matter what we do, whether it's Bartonella or whether it's Lyme disease, there's no connection between the two, and we are doing a disservice to the community. And now, you know, Rich and I believe that there is a connection. We've had Debbie Kimberg, whose son was autistic, and after treating Bartonella and Lyme, was significantly better, went from barely functioning to being able to go to college and graduate, right? Which is a huge transformation in his personal life. So we've heard this story from people at a personal level and on this podcast numerous times. But I guess, you know, how would you respond to that, where our communities, including our Lyme community, can get set in our ways and not want to recognize we could be wrong? And ultimately, we just want to feel better. And whatever that is, whatever the truth is, we want to be open to that, right? And even with the autism connection, do you think autism and Lyme and Bartonella really do have a great connection there?
Yes, but you cannot say every autistic child has now Bartonella or a virus, Coxsackie virus. You need to differentiate. It's like a peeling the onion model, and that makes it interdisciplinary. We need to respect each other. So, but some groups, I know what you're talking about, they just stuck in a one-way street. They say, no, there's no connection. This is an exclusion, and this can damage the patient. So you need to think about that. And Bartonella has to do with the cats, cat scratches, ticks. It's a cat story also, or dog story behind that, or tick story. This means also this peeling the onion model in where I also thought about that 10 years ago, peeling the onion model. It's also, let me say, the environment, the heavy metals, the hormones, the autoimmune, the dirty water, the environment, maybe the 5G, whatever you discuss in that. But we all belong together. And we not every patient has every problem. We need to differentiate, but there's no doctor, there's no clinic in the world doing that. You know, we are stuck in the different disciplines. I'm infectious disease. I could do the postulation. Every autistic child is suffering now from Bartonellosis, plus maybe a virus, plus maybe Borrelia together in a multiple. But that means that we need to differentiate, but we need to check also this. Not everybody has Bartonella antibodies. Not everybody has Bartonella ELISpot positive. Not everybody has lymph node swollen where you could do biopsy. Not everybody has elevated VEGF, whatever. So we need to differentiate. And then the doctors they come into borderlines, okay? Because functional medicine, what is functional medicine? What is mitochondriopathy? You know, mitochondriopathy can be Lyme disease, can be virus, can be parasite, can be co-infection. It's unspecific. The symptoms are completely unspecific. But in this field, when I saw that, I developed a special checklist. It's named the co-infection checklist, interestingly. And I said, nobody can know about all of the symptoms these different bacteria in the ticks are doing with you. And the doctors cannot know that. How can you know about all of the symptomatology in the teaching books? They are not infectious diseases doctor, but I'm doing the whole day. So I learned from Boris Cano that time, really. 18 years ago, and I said, wow, he's good in this. And then in Germany, we learned about that. Now we talk about more the co-infections, sure, but that's not the whole story. We need to bring this interdisciplinary teams on a round table, maybe, you know, not to exclude each other and not to do aggression. No, it's not Lyme disease. You're crazy. It's genetics, epigenetics, whatever. So we need to give the patient a chance. But if an infection is behind that, you have so many options. You can diagnose, you can treat, patients getting better. Not every autistic child has a Lyme disease, for sure, but some have that. And if you have it, you need to treat.
So, Dr. Armin, let's talk about one of the things that we're very sensitive about here at Tick Bootcamp. And one of the things that we've argued with many of our guests and some of our mentors is how to define Lyme disease, right? And whether or not we should even be using the word Lyme to describe this spectrum of illness, right? So we here at Tick Bootcamp are, as you probably know, very big fans of Dr. Alan McDonald. And Dr. Alan McDonald took the position on our podcast, and actually in some of his writings, is that we should divorce from the term Lyme. We actually disagree with Dr. McDonald. Despite loving him as much as we do, we don't think we should be divorcing from the term. We think we should be taking control of the definition of the term. And our argument is that Lyme disease should be defined as a polymicrobial, multisystemic, chronic infectious disease. And if we did have that definition as a definition of this disease, then more people and more doctors in particular would have the capacity to at least consider this spectrum of disease as a possibility for just about anything that people come in with. But unfortunately, you know, when we have organizations like the CDC and the NIH who are defining Lyme disease as an infection from one bacteria, and it has a particular limited set of presentations, largely developed by the early rheumatologists who were first evaluating the Lyme clusters, we have a lot of challenges at the outset just defining this disease. So what would be your reaction to the Tick Bootcamp definition of Lyme disease as a polymicrobial, multisystemic, chronic infectious disease?
Yes, this is where I came from before Corona. Before COVID-19, so 3-4 years, I exactly it was my opinion, okay? So first to say the tick is a dirty needle. It need not to be Lyme disease. It could be also Ehrlichia anaplasma doing similar symptoms like Lyme. The case definition is so important also for the studies. You know, the studies are not respecting in the differentials chronic multiple. The studies CDC or we are doing, we are now on the way, we look for multiple infections. So every patient, think Borrelia burgdorferi is coming through your skin. Not every patient has a bull's rash. 10% have a summer flu, and then they have the infection and then they get symptomatic after that. So the doctors don't know that. These dirty needles, they can transmit a lot of pathogens. And in this current stage, we don't know what is all in the ticks. The vets, they know more than us. You know, if you talk with a vet about a dog, Bartonella and Babesia, they know all about that, much more the different subspecies, but not the humans. You know, the humans are not diagnosed and treated. The tests are not so good as the vets have the tests. You know, that's the next problem. But what can you tell you after the crisis? We have a model, and that's pretty clear in the world. It's opened my eyes, and I'm not the only one now where I say it's maybe still a hypothesis, but I think it's realistic. When the infection is coming into your body, what happens? You get an inflammation, correct? And you get, after a while, immune dysfunction. So what is happening in this model? That's the 3I model in the world. We are talking now, discussing, it's a little group, but it's pretty clear that it's a 3I model: infection plus inflammation plus immune dysfunction. What happens with your body? The same is with SARS-CoV-2. If SARS-CoV-2 is coming in your body, what's happening? Inflammation, immune dysfunction. What do you get from this? Coagulopathies, cold hands, cold fingers, no oxygen in your blood. You have air hunger, whatever. You have the inflammation, you have the coagulopathy, and then you get the autoimmune disorders. Or in the worst case, you get cancer. We know that. So this is the Th17 pathway. The immune dysfunction, every infection, you get an immune suppression. It's pretty clear. So these infections, they do cytokines outside, they inflame you, and by this and by the pathogen, the release of the different toxins, whatever you name it, lipopolysaccharides, then you come to this immune dysfunction. What is immune dysfunction? Immunology. I worked also immunology with my HIV patient. This is exactly the HIV model. It's the AIDS model of the 80s. We are coming now back to that from SARS-CoV-2, and the same model with Lyme disease, the same model. So it's not just what you did, the definition for the infection, the polymicrobial, it's the inflammatory part and the immune dysfunction part. And immunology, it's clear. If you have a weak host, you get a tick bite, you have a higher chance to get really evident Lyme disease than immune competent persons. This depends on pre-existing conditions. And this is so important with our cellular and humoral immune system. As an example, you cannot imagine how many from us are running around without knowing that we have a lot of infections, silent carrier. So the infection sleeping in us. Also, Borrelia burgdorferi can persist intracellular, persistiform strain, but we have special tests for that. So you see, it's persistent infection, but it can be reactivated. And some of us, they never get sick, never. Silent carrier. Silent inflammation, never get sick, never. Maybe you have a bad gut or situation, or you have a leaky gut, whatever, but you never get really sick. Some of us get very, very sick. Why? Because they have genetical predispositions. Maybe you have a lot of stress, you have a hormonal problem with the cortisol, with the adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine. So you have a weakened host. The same model with SARS-CoV-2. This for all of these infections. And Lyme is doing the same, you know, you cannot differentiate. And we need to come to a model also, in my opinion, pretty clear, and also other professors. We need to diagnose and to treat the 3 big I's: the infection, the inflammation, and the immune dysfunction. Otherwise, you never will come forward in chronic conditions.
So do you believe that is the path? It's infection to inflammation to immune dysfunction, or is it something other than a direct path to immune dysfunction? And are you defining chronic disease or chronic illness as a disease that has overwhelmed your immune system?
That's a good question. So if you're healthy, you're completely healthy, and you have a tick bite, the tick bite can really make you sick. It can kill you with a myocarditis, you know, so you can die by that. It can be really aggressive, you know. Also, we need to respect that some Borrelia subspecies are really aggressive to us, like SARS-CoV-2. Some got really sick from SARS-CoV-2, some not, you know. So it depends also, we name it the pathogeneity of this pathogen. It can be really, really aggressive, this Borrelia subspecies to you, and you are a weakened host. And then I think it's more the triggering factor. So the inflammation is triggering also the infection. The infection is also triggering the immune dysfunction. The immune dysfunction, it's you are in a circling around that, you know. And if you don't break that, the three big eyes, the chance is really low. If you just use antibiotics, they also work a little anti-inflammatory, but they destroy the gut. Gut is 80% of the immune system. So you destroy natural immune system. That cannot work. And what I see nowadays, I can tell you, that's my last story now, where I'm coming from. Viruses. I see in every patient in the world, I see reactivated, name it maybe opportunistic, viral infections. And that's again the SARS-CoV-2 model. We have the long COVID. We have some patients with post-vax syndrome now. They have so many herpes viruses reactivated, so many EBV reactivated. And this is again the Lyme story. It's a model. It's a model for all different pathogens coming into our bodies. So if we don't follow up these three eyes, we don't have a good chance to cure the patient. We're stuck in one way, you know. We just using antibiotics. We use antivirals. We use antiparasitals. Therefore, the functional medicine is not bad. The functional medicine is good, but sometimes it's also just working around something. If you don't kill or bring the pathogen back into sleep mode, I name it sleep mode, into persistiforms, let them sleep. Let us arrange with the Borrelia. Let us sleep. Don't awake the lion. Don't awake a sleeping lion in your body. So support the immune system. Do a lot of this. Doing against inflammation, do good nutrition. So the gut plays a very, very important role. And in the gut, it's not just Borrelia. We have these gut viruses. And this is problem number one in the world, our nutrition, the gut viruses, and all of this mitochondriopathy, the fatigue, and all of these disciplines you will see in the future. They will not come around us. They need us. And this is my mission. Also, it's not, again, not the mission impossible to start with this model, not to exclude all of these different functional medicine doctors, bring them environmental medicine, heavy metal specialists, bring them together with us in one team, in one group. I know it's not so easy because sometimes they're stuck in a concept, microimmune therapies. Okay, they work on the immune system, that's good, but it's not solving the infection, it's not solving the inflammation. You know, you need something else, anti-inflammatory, anti-infective. And this is individually, we are profilers. I'm a profiler. I need to know which infection is active in which patient, okay? In many, it's Lyme disease in the beginning, but later on, it's a little more we find there. Maybe more opportunistic, maybe more reactivated from the sleep mode into activity because of the immune dysfunction. Patients are not diagnosed too late. We need 3 to 5 years for one patient to be diagnosed. It's impossible. So we need to teach about what is a Lyme symptom. I agree with you. Lyme symptom is unspecific. Bull's rash is not specific. It's pathognomonic to treat that, but it's very often misdiagnosed. We have atypical Bull's rashes as an example. The neurology and neuropathies are difficult. The Bell's palsy is easy, you know, Justin Bieber, this very famous singer, he's not suffering just from Lyme disease. He has also an EBV, or I think it's a varicella infection, something additionally that makes it more complicated. It's not just Lyme disease, so antibiotics will not help him on it. They cannot help. You cannot use antibiotics in virus infections. You can treat a bacterial infection, but you cannot treat a virus. You cannot treat the parasite with it. So we are profilers. We need to know individual profiles for the patient. And therefore, I'm staying with my laboratory for this test. I'm a criminal story. I want to know which infection is active in which patient or not. We have also patients with no active infections. Okay, they don't have anything. They have a different reason. And this is the message also to other groups around us, autism groups or chronic fatigue group, to come closer to us. We have this patient and we cannot come forward in helping with infection because they don't suffer from infections.
Dr. Armin, I want to ask a question because I think you very clearly outlined that it's never going to be a step-by-step sequential piece. It's not an infection leads inflammation leads to immune dysfunction in every case. You could have pre-existing inflammation, you could have pre-existing immune dysfunction depending on genetic disorders, and it's generally the collective three together which causes a chronic illness, right? And that makes sense. But then you also made a really important point when you said if we treat with strong antibiotics, we're addressing the infection, but we're then damaging the immune system because we're damaging the gut, right? So people listening to this podcast who have chronic Lyme disease, they have a Lyme infection, they have a Borrelia burgdorferi infection, and probably a lot of other co-infections. And we know all of us have inflammation, immune dysfunction, and a bucket of infections. How do you argue they treat? So your lab, Armin Labs, can say, hey, you have this set of infections, but you also have immune dysfunction and inflammation if you're chronically ill. If antibiotics aren't the answer, what do you recommend to people listening to this podcast to help get themselves in a healthy state of life so they can go back and do more and more things and not be bedbound or not be limited when it comes to their health and what they can do in life?
Now we're at the point where I did oncology chemotherapies. And what do you do with chemotherapies? You suppress, you destroy the immune system completely. What happens? Some patients can get bacteria infections, Yersinia or name it, Streptococcus, maybe easier, Staphylococcus to understand. And you need to treat with an antibiotic individually. So they get high fever, high CRP, high leukocytes. These are all signs for that, kidney problems. You need to differentiate. But some of these oncology patients with chemotherapies or HIV, they suffer from viral infections, reactivations. They got herpes, cold sores, whatever. And then you need a statics. Some of these patients, again, profile. You cannot say everybody is suffering from everything. That's incorrect. Some of these patients, they have viruses plus bacteria and maybe parasite additionally. So 3 different. So you need to treat all 3 different, the infections. But again, you need to treat, nevertheless, you need to treat in every case the immune dysfunction and the inflammation. This is independent from all of what I talked about, the differentials of, we have 5 different infections group in the world. One are the bacteria, the second is the virus group, the third one is a parasital group, and we have yeast and mold. We forgot that completely, yeast and mold. So, and this is also a huge issue if you use as an example antibiotics, and all of this, I name it chemical, chemistry. I was pharmacist, biochemistry. These are chemistry. This is synthesis of chemical products. They have side effects, and they can damage your liver. They can damage your kidney. You could get problem with the leukocytes, and you could get leukopenia. The leukocytes going down. The viruses. You have a virus infection. Leukocytes makes it still lower. So you weaken your neutrophils, your granulocytes. You have lymphocytosis. You are not immune competent. Therefore, when I came to that point, I thought, okay, what can we do now? We need to work on the Th1, Th2 immune system. We need to know, we need to work on the natural killer cells for sure. Is it a strong CD56, CD57 situation? What about the Th1 system, CD3 cells? What about the humoral immune system, CD19 cells, immune globulins, IgG subclasses, subclass deficiencies? We need to know the immunology of this patient to bring that also together with the infection. And then we need to about the inflammation. We have, as an example, sonulin, this marker, or the Rantes. It's also a marker for inflammation, cytokines, cytokine profiles. We are profilers because all of these infections are doing cytokine profiles, interferon gamma, TNF alpha, interleukin 2, 6, 10, whatever. So we need individual profiles, and then we need to balance the immune system, bring it back, but we need to support the natural immune defense. So it's good to have antibodies. It's good to have cellular immune reactions. It's good to have natural killer cells. If you don't have them, you will die. You are immune incompetent. You die easily from an opportunistic infection, from a yeast and mold infection. So we need to bring that all together. And this, I know I understand it. No, for your understanding, it's really complex. How can we bring all of that together? We need a book maybe, or some disciplines, immunologists bring them together with us, infectious diseases doctors, inflammatory specialists, functional medicine doctors. So we need to bring all of us together, and then we can develop a general concept, but we don't have a wonder pill, a wonder drug for everybody. That was my dream, to have a wonder drug with Artemisia maybe in it, selenium, zinc, whatever, maybe some stevia, some antivirals from Stephen Puner, to put something all together in a big pill for everybody. But this is also not the solution, you know, because not everybody tolerates the different complementary pathways. And nowadays, I'm not so a fan of these chemicals, you know, not of the antibiotics, not of the disulfiram. I'm on the way nature, coming back to the nature, coming back to the roots of medicine, from Greece, from here, Germany, Hildegard von Bingen, Sebastian Kneipp. So the German herbal medicine, this is, it's no risk for the patient. But in the end, maybe you need for some patients harder drug, you need a harder therapy to help them because they have a crisis. The pathogen is so active, so aggressive in the body. You need to stop it. We learned all of that from SARS-CoV-2. We learned that, you know, how to handle, how to deal. The doctors are now a little more open-minded to that, but they don't understand the complexity. And now we are going back to normal mode. It's not so good, but this time was a good time for us. We learned a lot about our immune system, about the inflammation, about the multiple opportunistic reactivation, and that was good for, I think, also for Lyme disease. So we should not be to be focused. I also friend with Alan MacDonald. I know him very well. So I also on that way to say, okay, Alan, you're correct with that, but now the time is going more into this 3 I's.
So, Dr. Armin, one of the things that, you know, we as patients generally hope for and almost expect is that there's a bug that's causing us to be sick. There's going to be a medication that will kill that bug, and then we won't be sick any longer. And what you're arguing, and I think it's important for our listeners to understand, is that it's much more complex than that, that we've essentially been set up by the medical community to believe one bug, one medicine, and we're better. And really what we have is a much more complex experience where it is going to be multiple bugs, which is consistent with our definition of Lyme disease here at Tick Boot Camp. We also have these environmental factors that you were defining before, such as mold and other environmental factors that we are harboring. So you were talking about our microbiome and all of the other bugs that we're managing, but we are not symptomatic, but we're able to manage them. And then, of course, we were talking about a little bit about genetics and that prong of genetics and epigenetics, and what is our predisposition, and how are the bugs and our interaction with the bugs changing us epigenetically, meaning the non-coded genes, how are they now changing so that it's not serving us? So we have this very complex model that you're outlining for us. And I think it's important for folks in our community to understand that it's not one bug, one drug, one solution. It is a multifaceted solution, and it's difficult for doctors to understand. But at the same time, it's also important for us as patients to understand that our goal should be set in a way that we're looking to ultimately get into remission by dealing with our immune dysfunction, dealing with our inflammation, and dealing with the infection, but not just the infection piece, and not just the infection from one bug, but how it's presenting overall, and then dealing with all 3 elements of this in a collaborative way.
Absolutely correct. So this is the way for the future. You will see. One point, you say, okay, we agree if we treat early enough, there's not a high risk to get more chronic also, but don't forget what I mentioned, some of these bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi in this case, very aggressive. So you can try what you want. You don't have a chance. Maybe they are antibiotic resistant. But what we saw in a lot of models, I was involved also in scientific projects 10 years ago with a European project with Professor Gilbert. We saw this, that Borrelia is moving with SAPI, this SAPI at the same time, that Borrelia is moving within seconds intracellular into persister forms, into round bodies with a double membrane. So, and it's hidden in the macrophages, so you cannot reach it easily with an antibiotic. You cannot reach it. You can do what you want, also in chronic condition, also in the very fresh infection. The mistakes were done from the doctors. If you want to take out mistakes, too short treatment, not monitoring bullseye rashes, misdiagnosing. These are the mistakes in the beginning. If you diagnose it early, we have a better chance to use good antibiotics, but we need to monitor patients. Also, if you have a bullseye rash, you need to do control check of bullseye rash. How is your treatment working? Not just giving 10 days doxycycline. That's sometimes not enough. You know, we cannot do the postulation, one dosage, 400 milligram or 200 milligram, 10 days, 3 weeks, then it's good. So this is no postulation for Borrelia burgdorferi or other pathogens. And also maybe at this point, again, the tick is a dirty needle. And who guarantees? So I'm a fan of the tick test. I want to know what is in the tick. We have a PCR, Nobel Prize winning method, good prizes. Keep the tick, check the tick. If you have the tick, what is in the tick? What is in this pathogen? And many have rickettsiosis, not Lyme disease. So it is completely different. Also symptoms. It's not a bullseye rash, you know. You need to know. And some are burning the ticks, and then the tick has gone. So I came from tick test over 20 years ago. I said, keep the tick test. It's not a money-making issue. It's a self-cost price. Laboratories doing. It's prevention. Test the tick or keep the tick. You know, the oldest patient is the Iceman, Ötzi, 3,600 years old. So you can do the PCR. The oldest tick is 40 million years old. Borrelia burgdorferi is 15 million years old. So it's a very, very old infection. It's not nothing new. But we have now modern laboratory medicine. We have now modern treatment. We are in a better time period now. So we need to know what is transmitted from the tick. It's not just to say it's now Lyme disease because I have bullseye rash. It could be the same time you have Babesia in the tick, you know, so, and you have a double infection, and if you just treat with an antibiotic, you don't treat the parasite, you don't treat Babesia. You need maybe that time you would have need an anti-malaria treatment, hydroxychloroquine, whatever you give for this patient. You need to treat this patient for Babesia at the same time. But if you don't know that, or you do blood tests maybe in this patient for Babesia, you do blood tests for Ehrlichia anaplasma, the ticks are completely different, also in different regions. And again, the vets have better tests. We have so many, I think, so many subspecies from Borrelia we don't know actually. They're coming to our body and we cannot test for them, you know. We have so many rickettsia, we cannot test for them. We don't have the good tests, you know, and affordable tests. This is a huge problem. We need to cooperate with the vets, and they know more, I think, about that. This is one of our aims also from ILADS, I think so, to come closer with other experts, universities, because normally you care more for your dog with the parasites or Lyme disease or Babesia than you care for the pet owner, for the dog owner. This is ridiculous, you know. And you say, yes, absolutely correct, Armin. So we need to know what is in the dirty needle, but also it's in mosquitoes. Maybe you need to know that Borrelia can be in mosquitoes, you know. it's not just, we have proven cases in mosquitoes, single case reports about that. It's also in the guidelines. We have literature about that. So not to make you panicking about that, but it could be that you get a bullseye rash from mosquito bite after that. I had horse flies. I had such patients, you know. So interestingly, I never would have believed in that because it's tick-borne illness. Maybe let it name vector-borne illness. It's much better to ask for vectors. And a lot of these infections are acquired in foreign countries. If you travel in Australia, they say, no, we don't have Lyme disease, we don't have the pathogen, but Australians traveling around, and I can bring them some ticks, you know, import some ticks to Australia on a kangaroo, bring the kangaroo back with the ticks, and then you have Borrelia Lyme disease in Australia. So the songbirds, the birds play a role with the multiple sclerosis bringing. This is now this pathogen can be everywhere in your garden, everywhere. So So we need to educate. And in America, I think it's wonderful what the park rangers doing in some areas. They inform prevention, don't lean on the trees, don't check yourself after ticks. And so this is really good education. America's doing better than Germany, as an example.
Dr. Armin, we couldn't agree more that veterinary medicine can help us continue to make advancements in the Lyme world. And we just actually this past week, we launched our podcast interview with Professor Nicole Baumgart from Johns Hopkins. She's the director of the Lyme and Tick-Borne Disease Institute over there at Johns Hopkins for the last year. But she has a multidisciplinary background like yourself, Dr. Armin, in veterinary medicine, infectious disease, and she's bringing all that together to help advance research. So I think collectively with your work and everybody else you mentioned, like Birscano, Horowitz, Shoppy, now we have got Baumgart, all of your interdisciplinary backgrounds together will help bring these things and identify more things that were previously unknown. Because it's never just going to be, like you said, this one bacteria, this one strain. I mean, we know here in the States, people get tested for Lyme disease. They're negative, they go to a specialty lab like yours and they test positive because we're not even looking for certain strains in our standard lab core Western blots or ELISA test, right? So that's another, I'll say, deficit when it comes to testing for Lyme disease. But I want to talk to you about your research study you published about anti-nuclear antibody seropositivity and fibromyalgia associated with Borrelia-specific T lymphocytes, right? I know that's a mouthful, and but reading that as fast as I did probably makes no sense. But I think simply put, it means that in a testing of fibromyalgia patients, you found that the ones that had, I believe, ANA antibodies, autonuclear antibodies, which indicate some sort of autoimmune problem, to your point of 3 eyes, right? Immune dysfunction. Those with immune dysfunction that had fibromyalgia had antibodies for Borrelia. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I understand the study, and if you could help us explain what your research study findings were and what this revelation means to the community.
Yes, this is interesting experience. We had with this study from Isle of Wight with Bazan Puri, professor from London. He initiated, we have a lot of data, there will become more publications. You will be surprised what's coming out with the fibromyalgia group. But what interestingly, we found this ANA titer, I think around 20-30%. This is not surprising, this is described, but we know that Borrelia burgdorferi could do a biomimicry effect, an autoimmune disorder, this ANA titer, or vasculitis. Vasculitis is also a word for that. And we've found the ANA titer a significant correlation with an activity against Borrelia burgdorferi in this test system. So what does that mean? That means to me that you need to check every fibromyalgia patient for ANA titer, which is not so pretty common because ANA titer means collagenoses like Sjögren, or SLE, systemic lupus, this direction. You need to check all of these patients for vasculitis, and you need to check them for sure for Lyme disease. So that means there is a correlation with it for sure. Because Borrelia can do the ANA titer, we know that from rheumatoid arthritis patient. There was research done 15 years ago with it, OSPA, the outer surface protein A, which is mimicking. It's a mimicry effect, mimicking. And then your body thinks, oh, wow, that's Borrelia burgdorferi, but it's producing wrong antibodies against parts of Borrelia burgdorferi, which are parts of your own immune system. It's named also the shared epitope. We have that in our ELISpot test, the LFA1, lymphocyte function antigen 1, which is important to check in this test. And then we see, okay, autoimmune disorder, check this patient for autoimmune disorder. And Borrelia can do that. Borrelia can be the reason for fibromyalgia. When I started with my first patient treatment, I had rheumatoid arthritis patients, and they had CCP antibodies and rheumatoid factor very high, and Lyme disease the same time. And I treated the Lyme disease, and the titer, the CCP antibodies and the rheumatoid factor, they were going back from 10,000 to 200, and the patient improved just treating Lyme disease from rheumatoid arthritis. But this is, again, this is not a rule for all patients, but it belongs in the medicine. We name it differentials. You need to know that. So rheumatoid pathologists need to know that with the ANA titer and Lyme disease, the correlation, but they don't do that. It's not in the guidelines. So we need to bring that into evidence-based paperwork, bring them into guidelines, and then they will check for Lyme disease. Then they give patients a chance, a hope, treat them with Rocephin or other macrolides, whatever you're using, or doxycycline, minocycline, treat the patients, and metronidazole, you have a good chance to treat them in this case. But no, it's not a rule for all, you know, it's a profile. Not every patient is every time the same. You cannot do that postulation. It's impossible. So this was the way of this study. We found also an association of chlamydia pneumoniae in this fibromyalgia group, an active IG or a higher IgG titer with heart rhythm problems. So that's also evidence-based medicine now. We published that 3 weeks ago, Basanpuri, and we found this Coxsackie virus story. Coxsackie is one of my favorite pathogens in the world. I think it's more than Lyme disease. It's a gut virus, enterovirus, where I don't know why I came to that, but it was by success and then by accident, sorry, that's the word, I came to that, and it's now a successful story for that virus, gut virus. And so many in Canada I see, and also I think in America, I don't know, they suffer from active gut virus infections. At the same time, they have Lyme disease. It's a easy test, an IgA test. So you see so many IgA, and you can say the test is shit, the test is wrong, it's not reliable. No, the test is reliable, it's accredited, certified. And so this is the story behind. We need to bring quality in the laboratories, quality in the therapies. We need to publish these studies. I'm on the way doing something, other experts doing. So publishing, that's all the aim of ILADEF now. We need to publish, and then we need to show evidence, and then we have a chance to come to guidelines and to change the world for you patients, Matt and Rich, to change the world for you.
Well, we are so appreciative and grateful for all the work that you're doing. I mean, I just want to make sure I understood what you said correctly, because in the fibro world specifically, not only did you identify antibodies, so anti-nuclear antibodies with Lyme contributing to a subset of fibro patients, and you were very clear, not all fibro patients have Lyme, but some of them you said have, Coxsackie virus, or they have chlamydia pneumonia. Those other infections that could be viral infections could be contributing to fibromyalgia as well, right? So you're saying that, hey, if somebody goes and has a fibro diagnosis, look deeper, maybe look for Lyme, look for ANAs, look for Coxsackie, look for viruses, and all of those things could be contributing to fibro, right? And that's one piece of it. We know Dr. Alan McDonald has talked about Lewy body dementia with having an underlying cause of Lyme disease. We know he's talked about blood cancer having underlying connection to Lyme disease. We talked about autism and the Bartonella connection. You talked about hair loss, right? I mean, when I first got sick, I went from having hair to no hair pretty quickly. Rich knows, in my early 20s. These are all signs. And the frustrating part is that although you are working, and thank you, I mean, within the last few weeks, you said you published in more studies with Coxsackie and chlamydia pneumonia and fibro. Although we have this information anecdotally and it's working on being solidified into these scientific studies, many of these specialists, when it comes to the cancer field or the autism field or the fibro field, they're not looking for these underlying conditions, which many of them can be Lyme or some other viruses or other things. So why do you think these specialists are so resistant to look for underlying root causes just because it's not mainstream, just because we don't have these SOPs or these policies in place to say, hey, if you suspect autism, look for these things too. Or hey, if you have fibro, look for Coxsackie, look for chlamydia pneumonia, look for Lyme disease, look for ANA titers. And these things can result in significant improvement in a short period of time of your patient's symptoms. Why are specialists so resistant to do these things when you have proven many of them and you're close to proving some others and you have anecdotal evidence of some other connections as well?
Yeah, this is really it's political, it's political. Why don't we come forward with Lyme disease? Why don't we come forward with infections in general? This is a political thing. It's blocked from some level, I think so. There's a lot of lobbyism behind that, so everywhere. The communities, neurologists, maybe they don't want that, in the communities, they suppress also literature, paperwork, scientific paperwork. It's suppressed. It's not mentioned in the guidelines. And again, the guidelines, the doctors, they think it's a law and they follow the guidelines, but this is just recommendation level. We don't have guidelines. The cancer field is, I worked in oncology, and in 1991, I had one patient with an EBV infection, Epstein-Barr virus infection, and a patient had swollen lymph nodes, and so was wonderful. And then I did a 19 years old kissing disease. I did a biopsy from the lymph node, and at the same time the patient developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma, Burkitt lymphoma, 1991. So now we know that EBV can do, clearly the mechanism, we know that, can do non-Hodgkin lymphoma, leukemia. So we know a lot about this. Bartonella can do breast cancer. Bartonella can do also pancreatic cancer. We have papers, we have studies. You need to Google for that. Nobody's bringing this, what I postulate, the artificial intelligence is coming now into the field. We need an artificial intelligence to check all of this paperwork. It might be a case report, it might be a study, but we need to bring all of that knowledge. We have that in maybe older studies from the 90s. You will find a lot about this. Your hair loss. I had two patients like you, lost completely hair with acrodermatitis, Lyme disease on the scalp, and I treated with antibiotics. All hair came back. So what does that mean? Alopecia means also to check for Lyme disease. But no dermatologist is doing that. They also, it's the hormones, it's your testosterone, it's something else. It's not an infection, so the infections are not so. It's a younger, a younger discipline in medicine. HIV, young 80s, Lyme disease, were very young disciplines, not so established like neurology. We need to find, and it's really complicated to understand that not everybody can do infectious diseases. They don't understand that. If I talk with them, sometimes they don't understand. Patients, you understand more, and you have maybe more time to Google, to learn, to teach yourself about Lyme disease. And then you go to your doctor and you say, I have Lyme disease. No, you don't have Lyme disease. I have this and this symptom. You say, I never heard about that. You are the experts, and this cannot be, sorry to say that. We need to turn it around. The doctors need to know more than you.
So Dr. Armin, Rich and I are going to jump into shortly after this, the testing, and we're going to put Armin Labs and what you're doing. But I just want to highlight something. You just discussed probably several dozen we'll say conditions, right? Hair loss, breast cancer, autism, the blood cancer, all these different things, fibromyalgia, that have an underlying root cause. And we recently did a post. We talked about, we had Professor Baumgart on. We launched our podcast this past Wednesday. We did a social media post about how the Lyme bacteria can obliterate your lymph nodes and cause problems with your immune system. Your immune system will not be able to build these long-term immune responses to build long-term immunity to things like Lyme disease. And we had a discussion about how that affects you overall beyond the scope of Lyme. And a lot of comments were made saying, hey, this is really scary. This is like apocalyptic. Why do you share such scary information? And I think you did a really good job of explaining why, because yes, it can seem scary, but the more knowledge we have, it really isn't scary, because if we understand the connection, the whole goal here is to improve our quality of life. And this can be life-changing. If you have these conditions and you can identify that, let's say, for example, Bartonella is causing you breast cancer, or a Bartonella infection or a Lyme infection is making an autism case worse, we can improve significantly a patient's quality of life. And therefore, it's important to discuss these connections. So if we understand one thing causes another, we can work with patients and doctors to improve quality of life, which is what it's all about, right? So how would you respond to that? People is claiming that a lot of this can be triggering, a lot of this can be scary, a lot of it hasn't been proven out yet. But on the flip side, if we can identify these connections, we can improve people's lives, right?
In the end, the last sentence was most important. You said the doctor or therapist did the right job when the patient is improving or healed. So that's the aim, nothing else. If your hair is coming back, you're cured, you're healed, You feel better. That's the mission. That's the job of a doctor, okay? To help a patient. What's happening now? The doctors destroy the immune system. They use so many cytokine blockers. They use so many immune suppressors. I never heard that. My generation was not educated that way in the cortical. I hate this. Meanwhile, so for every they use this little immune suppression. But what I can tell you also, I want to do another postulation or reality. It's reality. These infections are the reason. It's not the association. For some patients, it's a reason. And like my multiple sclerosis patient, this was neuroborreliosis or chronic Lyme disease with multiple sclerosis-like symptoms. Or Alan MacDonald would say it's chronic neuroborreliosis with Alzheimer's-like symptoms, okay? So we don't want to exclude the neurologists. We say, yes, you can say it's Alzheimer's still, but we want to know the reason. Is the reason active, is not active? This also in cancer, you want to know the reason. And if we come too late, we cannot treat the cancer patients. We come too late, we come sometimes too late. They die because we come too late. For Bartonella, it was too much progression in the body. And what I can tell you, maybe not a secret, but in every patient, I get a blood sample. They all have chronic multiple infections. There's not just one patient with just one single infection, believe me. They have up to 8, 9, 10 infections active in the same body. Not all infections, some of these, you need to differentiate again. You need to know again which infection. So some say, oh, okay, then I treat for virus. I don't know. I don't want to know which infection is active in my body. I take the whole cocktail, but this cannot be the solution. We need to know, like in a cancer, you could have 3 different types of cancer. You could have a breast cancer, a gastric cancer, and a colon cancer at the same time. We need to know which cancer is active in which patient, and then we treat, and then we have we name it the staging process, the cancer antigens. As an example, the CEA, it's one of these. We do a staging process, and the same we do with the laboratory tests. We know this patient has active herpes simplex virus, IgA is positive, ELISpot positive, and then we need to treat. And if we treat that patient, the IgA needs to vanish, need to be negative, and then we have reached then patient for sure needs to get better. This is chronic multiple situation. Every patient I diagnose in the world, it's not just Lyme disease. Lyme disease as a single infection, maybe in the beginning exists, but all of them have chronic multiple infections with viruses, parasites, yeast, and mold. That's the truth, that's a reality, and that's the way for the future.
So Dr. Armin, we want to bring you back to testing. This has been a fascinating discussion, and we could probably talk with you for hours and hours and hours about what we've begun to talk about. But I think most of the folks who are listening to this podcast really want to talk about testing, and they want to learn more about the testing element. And there's an upside and a downside to testing, right? And we can test the tick, which we had talked about a little bit more, and I want to build that out with you a little bit. We can test us for microbes, but we also have to test us for other issues because, as you had pointed out with the 3 I's, there is infection, there is inflammation, and there is immune dysfunction, right? So when we're talking about testing, I think what most people are focusing on is testing the microbes in their body. But I think before we get to that point, we should talk about testing the tick and what's the upside and the downside to testing the tick, right? Because the CDC in the US, for example, is questioning whether or not we should be testing ticks. Now, we here at Tick Bootcamp and our Tick by Blueprint strongly recommend that people hold on to their ticks and strongly recommend that they test their ticks. But let's talk about what we find when we do test a tick and how that isn't always that isn't always going to give us the whole picture because of some of the things you were talking about before, which is because it's a polymicrobial infection, because it's not just what's being spit into you, but what you're also harboring and your genetic predisposition and the environmental and factors that you're dealing with, that perhaps there's something, to be said about the CDC's position, which is the information that we're getting may not give us enough of a picture to give us the treatment tools that we need. So let's first talk about tick testing and what the limits are of tick testing, not just the virtues of tick testing.
Yeah, the limitation is that I think we cannot test for all pathogens in the ticks. There is one Neoelichia mycorrhensis, which is kind of rickettsia. There are so many different subspecies, other species. We don't know them already. When we started with tick tests, I talked with Eva Sabi and I said to Eva, maybe Chlamydia mycoplasma is in the ticks. And she tested ticks for Chlamydia mycoplasma and she found it. This is an aerogen transmitted pathogen, so the tick test is important. I would not test all of the ticks. Maybe you keep the tick and you with a Scotch tab, and then you can decide, because it costs money. If you have 100 tick bites a season, it's not affordable to test all of the ticks, and it doesn't make really sense to take the whole year long. If you're deer hunter, doxycycline prophylactically, that makes damage to your gut and make other pathogens multi-resistant, like Staphylococcus, MRSA discussion, and Enterococcus. So, but the tick test makes sense. If you have the tick, keep the tick. And if you, now it's a discussion, I know, should I use, if I have a tick with Borrelia burgdorferi, I'm not symptomatic, should I take antibiotics? This is always the question, difficult to answer prophylactically. Some say yes, some say no. I'm so in between. I would say, okay, if you're hypochondriac, maybe you take some antibiotics, but you need to know antibiotics are chemotherapies. They suppress your immune system. You have a risk for your gut to damage your microbiome. And so you need maybe to test the ticks. And then if you know the test, you can follow up. You can monitor yourself if you get some symptoms. But also if the tick is positive, maybe you go to your doctor and say, oh, could I do a Western blot with my blood or an ELISA? Maybe I have some antibodies here. I can demonstrate we name it seroconversion from IgM to IgG. Or you are a patient, you had IgG, but you don't know about that. And that makes it complicated for laboratories to say this was really a new or fresh infection which made you sick. So it makes always sense to keep an eye on that, on this vector, so keep the vector and test it and then document it with official report. The method is a PCR, it's a gold standard, so it's not limited. It's like SARS-CoV-2. If you want to say, is it living Borrelia or is it dead Borrelia, PCR cannot decide. You need to culture that. In the tick, it's in the midgut of the tick. So, but we can say the tick is free of that, and that gives you a higher chance that you don't get an infection with Borrelia or rickettsia, and that makes you better sleep, maybe. But also, just 18% of patients remember a former tick bite. 18%, 1/8. So there's no exclusion criteria.
Right. So Amanda is going to take you through the testing piece of humans, but I want to talk to you a little bit more about tick bites. So my last 2 tick bites, I saved the tick and we tested the tick. And one of the reasons I like tick testing, and I'm just talking about this from patient standpoint, is it's a data point that I use to consider whether or not I was going to treat prophylactically or I wasn't going to treat prophylactically. So the tick, not the last tick bite, but the tick bite before that I had found a tick, and I do tick check regularly, but I didn't tick check one evening before I went to bed, and in the morning I found a tick biting me. So I tested that tick, and in that case, I did decide to take antibiotics prophylactically, right? Because I wasn't taking the steps necessary to protect myself in a tick endemic community, and because I did find the tick, and because I wasn't prophylactically protecting myself the way I am now, I decided that I was going to take the antibiotics. But it gave me as a patient information that I needed to make a decision myself with my doctor, right? Now, I do know that the research shows that a tick could harbor up to 200 different microbes. And when we're testing a tick, at most, we're only testing 19. So that leaves at least 81 microbes that tick could be harboring that we're not even capable of testing. But it is a data point for me in the short term to decide whether or not I'm going to take antibiotics. And in that case, I did. And in the long term, it gives me information about what I could be harboring so that if I become symptomatic, what other steps I could take, which is what you've outlined. Now, with the most recent tick bite that I suffered, I did test that tick as well, but in that case, I did not take antibiotics. And the reason I didn't take antibiotics is because I now am more Lyme, I am now more Lyme educated. And because I am taking the Restore kit and I am prophylactically protecting myself and wanting and enhancing my immune protections as a result of the herbal protocol that I'm taking, I decided rather than taking antibiotics that time, what I did is I actually just doubled the Restore kit, and I went from the base level of Restore that I was taking to a greater level of the Restore kit. And I believe because of the prophylactic protections, because I was generally healthy, and because I was then adding to the treatment, that I was not going to use antibiotics. So it gave me as a patient information that allowed me to make a different decision in consultation with the doctors I was working with. So my argument is that we should be testing our ticks. We should be taking the information, but we certainly shouldn't believe either we understand all of the microbes that are in us, or we understand how those microbes are interacting with the rest of the microbes we're harboring and our genetic predisposition and the environmental issues. But it's just a data point that I think is important for a patient to have. And I'd like your reaction to that before Matt takes you into the human testing.
I would do the same. Exactly correct. When you said this, that was exactly my word. I said, okay, infectivity, the pathogen meets immunity. Every time. It's always the same. You know, during SARS-CoV-2, we learned that, but it was clear. You have an immune system. If your immune system is weak, the pathogen can hit you down. But if you have a strong immune system and you do something, it's better, vitamin C, whatever, high dose, D, K1, K2, you can do a lot about this, but it's no guarantee, okay? Because SARS-CoV-2 or Borrelia burgdorferi can be very aggressive to you. So if you feel symptomatic, please test yourself with an antibody test or ELISpot, interferon gamma release assay, and then you know, is it active or not active, and then you can treat. But I would not use antibiotics without probiotics, without immune stimulation. This is antibiotics are chemotherapies, and you make you multi-resistant. So I think CDC is right in some points, not too much antibiotics. You have antibiotics in the chicken, you eat up a lot of antibiotics the whole day. So also organic food can be problematic sometimes. So your lifestyle, and what we forgot a little in the discussion, stress. Stress, okay? All of these infections are stress triggered, all of these infections. So as an example, if you had a surgery, if you have a chemotherapy, where I worked, the patient extremely low with the immune system, stress makes it, you know, stress, adrenaline, cortisol, all of these problems, dopamine, you have this stress. And who is not stressed, you would say now, okay? And age. Stress and age, you know, over 60, immune system going down, natural immunity is going down, natural killer cells. So what I could tell you, you should do immune profile. You should check your CD19 cells, if they're quite good. These are chronic markers. And then you need to work on it. If your CD19 cells are not good, your humoral immune system is not good. If your CD3 cells, and this is what I see daily, we have so many also young people with so bad CD3 cells. It's horrible. This is a general T lymphocyte marker it's a flow cytometry. So they are so weak, and we need to treat the T cells, bring them, they're looking like HIV patients, they have AIDS, but they don't have AIDS. You know, this is the model we have. The natural killer cells also bad. We need to support this. They don't know that. We discuss daily, every day, is it now a pre-existing, as you mentioned, condition, or a longer existing condition, or is it new? Is it fresh? So we don't know. It's an easy test, not expensive. Test your immune system. This is what I postulated also during SARS-CoV-2, the same. I said, test the patient before vaccination, test them during the COVID crisis. How good is your immune system? We never did this, you know, immune globulins. Do you have enough immune globulins? Do you have IgG subclass deficiencies? IgG 1 and 3 is done from Lyme disease as an example. So IVIG could help some patients also with Bartonella and so. We need to know that, you know, we need to know about immune system. And coming back to the inflammation, the third eye. I cannot see your skin actually, but maybe you have an inflamed skin. You have some cold hands, cold fingers, no oxygen in your body. You feel fatigue sometimes, you know, we have a dry skin, the perfusion is not good, and you're young. So this can be also a sign of an underlying silent carrier, silent inflammation. We need to know that, the third eye. Otherwise, we cannot do a good way, like you described it, also inflammation. So what can you do? Anti-inflammatory diet. We name it basic good water, no plastics, whatever. There's a lot of good nutrition you can do. We learned also during Corona crisis, we learned a lot about the anti-inflammatory part. You can also do some basic remedies for you in the water to make you basic. But this is not solving your perfusion. And some of us, we eat too much cholesterol, too much fat. So the nutrition plays, to me, the most important role in the inflammation of our body. So what we eat up, the toxins, not just the toxins, the microplastics, what we eat up is coming to our body, and then we cannot detox. And all of these infections, they block the lymphatic system. So the lymph nodes sometimes are swollen. The virus is coming to that, the parasites coming. We cannot detox all of these proteins coming out. So what I am saying now, we need also detox. We need something for the liver to help our liver, which is the main organ. Don't drink alcohol, no alcoholics, nothing. So we can do a lot in our lifestyle, you know, if we avoid some things, and we can do prophylactically. And this will help you. It's no guarantee, but it's a help, as it was during COVID crisis. It's the same model.
Dr. Armin, let's continue to talk about testing the patient. And my general observation so far has been, if I were to go tell my doctor, I think I have Lyme disease, and he would run a test for me, it might be the 2-tier test, it might just be the ELISA test. But really what I'm looking for is the infection. It's one of the eyes on the 3 prongs of chronic illness or chronic Lyme disease. And it's not only just, it's not all infection, it's just the one strain of Lyme disease. So I'm getting tested for one particular type of infection, not other infections. At Armin Labs, it sounds like you do a broad spectrum of infections, basically as far as we can with modern science and technology, but you're also looking for inflammatory markers and immune dysfunction markers as well. So you're running the whole gamut of testing for the 3 eyes: infection, all of them. And infection, you brilliantly outlined before, is, I think the 5 classes are bacteria, virus, parasites, yeast, and mold, right? So you're looking for all those 5 subclasses of infection, not only just, different species of Lyme. Then you're looking at inflammatory markers and immune dysfunction. So can you tell us specifically what tests you offer at Armin Labs? And if we were to refer somebody to you and John Smith comes up to Dr. Armin and says, I'm chronically ill, I'm bedbound, I've been sick for 10 years, I got diagnosed with Lyme disease, I'm not getting better, I need to know what's going on in my body, what kind of testing would you recommend for that person that is offered at Armin Labs?
I would not recommend the ELISA and the Western blots and immunoplots. Forget them. Spare the money. That's nonsense. That's useless. If you have chronic, do the TICPLEX basic. This is a test for persistiform antibodies, for the round bodies intracellular. All tests I mentioned now, they are CE certified, IVD registered. Most of them are accredited, also CIP, Clinical American Pathologist accredited, so the quality is perfect. But do the TICPLEX basic for persistiforms. This helps you wonderful. If you have IgM persisters and all main subspecies inside of Celiae, Gariniae, and sensu stricto, so you can see that if you have IgM, IgG persisters or not, and this closing the gap, what we had with these negative false immunoplots. We have that still the problem, and Western blots. So we can close that gap up to 99%, not 100%, but 99, 98%. So this is a TH2 system. Do the TICPLEX, affordable test, not expensive. For the TH1 system, this is where I came from my multiple sclerosis patient 18 years ago. You do the ELISpot. This is an interferon gamma release assay. It's a cytokine release assay, standardized. We did a lot also for SARS-CoV-2 and for vaccinated patients, for viruses, and so on. This is a really good method. And this ELISpot, to mention that, is 20 to 200-fold more sensitive than ELISA or immunoblot. So that's nonsense doing immunoblots in chronic. But now you can say, okay, if I have now a Th1 suppression, I have really chronic Th2 dominant. Th2 dominant means you produce more antibodies after a while, autoimmune, Hashimoto's, Sjögren, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, ANA titer. After a while, you lose your Th1 capacity. You lose the ELISpot. You lose the natural killer cells. This is around 15% of the chronic patients suffering from that. Then you produce more antibodies. You switch. This is not good. This is not good. If you find antibodies, it's always not good. It's better to have a strong cellular immune system because this is a balanced Th1, Th2. But you're sick, okay? The immunology needs a balance, but if you have symptoms, you need to treat. If you don't have symptoms, you keep an eye on this Th1, Th2 immune defense. We have the same with interferon gamma release with the SARS-CoV-2 vaccinated and the long COVID patients. We see also that they produce interferon gamma still and they have long COVID. So this is the virus persistency of the S protein, the spike protein as an example. It's not for today, but just to mention you also the same test is used for long COVID in the same principle to check if it's still active. Something going on in your immune system, Th1, Th2. This is the perfect duo. You have the TICPLEX basic for the persisters, round bodies intracellular, IgG, IgM, and the pleomorphic is also in that for the whole spiral hit. So you have 6 tests for one super price, I would say. And you have not just talk about the price, but I know a lot of patients have money issues and now energy crisis. We need to make it more affordable. That's one also of my messages, my aims. And also the Th2 system. This is the interferon gamma release assay. We have a new test now. It's named the iSpot, which can, by the interleukin 2, it came up with the SARS-CoV-2 crisis, also to check if the patient is switching from Th1 in the interferon gamma maybe to Th2. So we can find also there information. Th1, Th2, interferon gamma release assay. I think this is what you can do from this side. And now we come to immunology. You have two tests you can find, I would say 99% of the patients. We see if they have active Lyme on Th1, Th2 persister forms or both or not. So, and we can work on that. We can bring them back into balance, produce more Th1 during Herxheimer's as an example. So we can monitor the patients very well. In the final end, it's not allowed to have ELISpot positive, so 2 months after successful therapies. And also the antibodies are allowed, but just IgG and not overboosted, not overboosting with the risk of autoimmune disorders. This really complex, I know that, but it's a short description of that. And for the immune system, I came from the CD57 cells from Ray Stricker. Ray Stricker did this study in 2000 it was, with Winger, and Joe Borascan did a little case report after that, I think so. And then they stopped all science on the CD57 and natural killer cells. And if they are low, you have for sure a chronic bacterial infection. The CD57 natural killer cells are not specific for Lyme. They are also low in Rickettsia, Bartonella, Streptococcus, Klebsiella, Bartonella. So, but they are good also marker for therapists to treat the natural killer cells. And by this, it's a short panel: CD3 cells, CD19 cells, CD56 natural killer cells, CD57 cells. So we can have a great look. Is there chronic viral infection? Is there chronic parasital infection? Is there chronic Lyme, Borrelia infection? So we get a lot of information from an easy panel, from a flow cytometry, which is also certified, IVD registered, whatever. So that's comparable. It's state-of-art diagnostics. And by this, I think we have a good chance to build the immune dysfunction by this short panel. And now the inflammatory part, inflammation, that it's a little more complicated, I know. So we can check interferon gamma, which is done with the ELISpot, as it's interferon gamma release. You see it's overproduction in this. We can do the TNF alpha we are doing. We do the interleukin 6 also. We cannot do all of the cytokines. You know, we need good tests. We can do the Rantes test, a chemokine, which is also for the dentists important, you know, for this NICO and where they did the surgery on that, because a lot of these teeth problems coming from infections for sure. And dentists don't know about that, most of them. Some groups are knowing. But these three, it's not so, all of this is not so expensive. And what I want to do a little cheaper for the patients, because my motto is to test more, to give more the chance, and to invest more in therapies. It's not that laboratories should make all of the money politically and do high price tests for the investors or so. That doesn't make sense. You know, we need to give the patient a chance. And if you have a test for IgG, that doesn't mean that you have active infection. In the tickplex, if you have the IgM, yes, you have an active infection for sure with persistiforms. I'm a fan of the IgA antibodies. As you know, we don't have it for Lyme disease, but they will be developed. Although in the saliva, the test coming a lot of these new models, new ideas, but still do the tickplex basic, do the CD57 cells, and do the ELISpot, and then you know what it is.
So what I really like about this is that your testing hits all the 3 I's: infection, inflammation, and immune dysfunction, but it also looks at broad to specific. So depending on, you know, the patient and what they have going on, it's going to give them an entire data set about their personalized health. So you mentioned that it can tell, you know, based on certain tests, we can determine, is it a chronic bacterial infection? Is it a chronic viral infection? Do you have active Lyme, right? And it's up to hundreds of times more sensitive than standardized testing we have here in the States. You mentioned it's affordable, but the part I guess I have a question on is a lot of doctors here in America don't like using private labs, and or they don't know how to, right? So if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're in America or the UK or Canada or Mexico or, you know, even Germany, how can they partner with their doctors to get an Armin Labs test? Because so much of this, as you noted, is so detailed and so advanced. We really need to partner with a practitioner and Armin Labs to get the appropriate testing and then to analyze the results, because the average Lyme patient isn't going to be able to analyze the results. They need to partner with a practitioner to do that. So how do most of your patients work with a doctor to get their blood tested overseas in Germany?
It's no problem to send samples from all over the world. We had it also during SARS-CoV-2. We did PCR also for some patients in Australia. So it's not the problem to send the samples. It's logistics. It's perfectly working. From some countries are difficult, South America, but we're also solving that. It's a little time critical to send that, but it's easy to send. But you're absolutely correct. We have special tubes. Maybe we mentioned that. You cannot send just a centrifuge tube. It's something special. And then we come to the point, not every laboratory can do that. Also Quest LabCorp, they will establish some experts on a level. It's handmade. A lot of this, it's not the clinical chemistry we are doing with blood counts or so. It's a really complex thing. You need good team members. It's manual. We are now more automizing some methods, but it's really complex what we are doing. And we have special tubes and time critical, free of any cost. We send the tubes around the world, the test kits, and then you can send them back with a UN declaration. It's no problem with the logistics. We are very fast. We do it within 2-3 days. You have the results, and we do it in cloud systems. And so data protection needs to be guaranteed. Germany is leading in this point, I would say, in the world, or Europe, meanwhile, America also. But we are also on the forefront there. So you can send, but it's not just to how do you do a test selection. That's how do you know which test to order? And a lot of doctors don't know simply. And I do a lot of webinars. I do Zoom calls, WhatsApp talks with them. But they learn quickly. It's a step by step, drop by drop. But they learn, and it's good. And after you get the results, you need also some help. It's not just doing results, you know. So what I'm doing, and I have a parasitologist and infectious disease expert also in my laboratory, is very good in parasites. So we need also to educate with the results to say, what does that mean now? And what we need to correlate the laboratory test results with the symptoms and the differentials. Okay, you cannot say everything is now Lyme, so my test is now negative. So I would say, yeah, this patient maybe had Lyme, but it's not active. So look for a different reason. And now we have the next challenge. We need to learn about all of these different infections: Yersinia, Campylobacter, Salmonella, CMV, human CMV in the colitis group, very important now. These enterotropic viruses, the cardiotropic viruses, the parasite. This is a chapter I'm not so the expert for that, but I have a parasitologist. He knows everything about that. But we don't have all tests for that, for sure. We have toxocaracanis, antibodies, cheap tests, which has to do with the dogs. So we have so many good. Toxoplasmosis is also with the cats. The cats and the dogs, let me say that sentence, they are so important in the transmission of pathogens. You cannot imagine that in the stool, and the people eat up the parasites without knowing that. And then they think they have Lyme disease, but it's a Lyme disease, a toxocariasis, neuropsychiatric symptoms, autism. You know, this is very complex thing. Or they have additionally Lyme plus, you know, Lyme plus. We could also say, not to exclude the Lyme community from that, we need to differentiate. If we don't differentiate, we got lost in the system. But the teaching books, again, coming back to the point differentials, if you go in the teaching books, they don't have they didn't have looked at multiple infections. All of the teaching books are just looked for one infection. Also in long COVID, they checked just for chlamydia pneumonia infection reactivation, but not for mycoplasma at the same time, not for Coxsackie virus, not for varicella. You know, we have a chronic multiple thing also in all of this paperwork. It's all shit. It's bullshit. You can throw away all of these guidelines, all of these studies, but they never looked at chronic multiple infections. What L. McDonald told you, it's absolutely correct. We have polymicrobial thing, how you want to name it. Nobody checked that. You know, all of the studies are bullshit, in my opinion. So we need to exclude in the new studies to say this is really a Lyme symptom, this is Bartonella symptom. Who can tell you? A small lymph node can be everything. Bartonella is doing, also viruses doing, parasites doing. You cannot differentiate. You could say everything is Lyme. That's not correct. So we need to differentiate. And this is the clinical differential that we need to get better. Also in the teaching books. Some say, Armin, you write a teaching book about that. Okay, maybe in my last phase of my career, I will do something like that, because a lot is in my brain. We need artificial intelligence. You can build up a lot in this. If you patient writing in a system, I have this symptom, the computer system is telling you with this probability you're suffering from this, you know, in a ranking or so. So the medical brain is working like that. And this is hard to educate doctors also, you know. It's for me a full-time job, 18 hours a day, so every day for years, for 20 years, and you cannot, and I feel somehow lost in the whole system, because I don't know also a lot of points. I'm not satisfied. They say, you know a lot, and I say, no, I'm the beginning of learning every day, new studies, new paper with a fibromyalgia, never knew about that. Chlamydia with the heart rhythm issues, nobody described that, you know, in the fibromyalgia group. We need to look more for the polymicrobials and the association with it, or the reason for it. And then we never give up, for sure. We are an absolute good track, I think, altogether with your support, bringing the consciousness with a tick boot camp, with the different experts, interdisciplinary. We are fully booked, you know, everybody's busy. For all of us, so we are successful. We help the patients. We know that we cannot help everybody. We cannot rescue everybody, but we have solutions the others don't have. That makes them aggressive. There's a lot of politics. We need to be careful under the radar. So this is a mission, but the mission is not impossible, but it's now switching.
So Dr. Armin, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your really busy schedule to talk with me and Matt. We are fascinated by your work. We are appreciative of all the work that you're doing. And we really want to stay in touch with you so that we can continue to learn more about what you're working on and what other opportunities you're offering to folks in the Lyme community to not only learn about what options they have available to them, but what testing tools you are developing and you're continuing to develop at an affordable rate for folks in the community.
Yes, thank you. Maybe I forgot one point. What the therapists, and I know patients rich like you mentioned already, I take this remedy, I take this prophylactically. The doctors are also helpless in therapy options. They don't know what to use, in which infection, which inflammation, no? So this is also a challenge. We need to work on that. How can we treat the viruses? When I started with this opportunistic viruses, EBV reactivation in Turing or CMV, it came later on in the scientific paperwork out. As an example, EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, is clearly associated with multiple sclerosis, clearly. But this group didn't look for Lyme disease, they just looked for EBV infections.
Right.
So you cannot say, that's the point. But what we see, it's good that this is happening, but we need also a good education or some more options for therapists what to do, and it's not so easy. I know there are different experts also on your panel talking. For me, it's not clear what we could do. For the wonder pill doesn't exist, so we need individual therapies. And maybe a message to that, if I can tell you something, because I have 1,000 therapists around the world sending me samples from everywhere. What I can tell you nowadays, so every therapist is the best one. This is should be a good word to motivate all of the therapists, but we need to learn from each other, and we need to develop more protocols, more natural products, more herbal products. And from my history, what was a good teaching book to me was also the Stephen Puner book for herbal antivirals, and I learned a lot about this. And the herbs will play an important role, the transfer factors in the TH1, TH2, the immune boosters, the nutritional aspects, the detox aspects, the genetical aspects, as you mentioned. So it's a complex thing, and we need also to find a community, a baseline, to find all of us together. That makes it complicated because everybody's an expert in this field, but we need to find solutions, and affordable solutions also for therapies. And maybe one last sentence for patients. If you don't come forward with a therapy 1-2 months, I talked with Joe Borascano years ago in Amsterdam about that, maybe your concept is not the best. You need to rethink your concept. Don't lose too much time in taking, as an example, antibiotics, and you say, I come into my one-way street with a dead end. You need to rethink. Maybe it's a different thing you're suffering from, additional thing, and you need to diagnose and treat this, and not just to say, I am doing now ozone therapies or hyperbaric therapies for 10 years. So that doesn't bring us forward. We need to be more flexible. And we need to change also therapists to say, okay, 1-2 months therapist, you tried with this patient, you did microimmune therapy or IHHT therapy, but it failed, or apheresis. You go to different therapists. We need to exchange the patients also, for the benefit, to say, or maybe you ask your therapist neighbor for some advice, or you discuss such cases to come forward. This would be also one of my hard aspects for the future, so that the patient, the longer the infection exists, the harder is the damage afterwards.
Well, thank you. I think we here at Tech Bootcamp certainly will agree with everything you just said there. We certainly believe in open source models. We certainly believe in making sure that we're pivoting from therapy to therapy and from coach to coach and from doctor to doctor, so that we have a full spectrum of support when we're on this journey. And a great place to start with that full spectrum approach would be at Armin Labs. So we can't thank you enough for the great work that you're doing. You're really blessing this community of people who are suffering from Lyme disease with a number of different testing and treatment options that would not be available but for the brilliant work you're doing and your lab is doing. So we can't thank you enough for the great work that you're doing, Dr. Armin.
Thank you very much. We never give up, and our mission is possible.